We have Arno Roger of Rapid 7 on track 2 on the examination of mindset and what science says about it. And then track 1, we have Jordan Colgan live from the studio on the principles of simple, hard, effective and how these will make our software better. If you've got questions, pop them in the Slido. But over to you, Jordan.
So before we get started, check this out. To change, you must first change the way you think. So this is going to be a pretty important concept later on. And hopefully, we're going to change the way we think about simple, hard, and effective. So let's get started. What if you were told that simple and hard makes effective results? We're talking about doing simple things as it gets hard and it being effective. If that doesn't make sense, don't worry, we're going to prove it using some logic and reasoning. So, if we take the opposite of simple, which is complicated, if you were to think of something complicated and hard, what do you think it would be? Think of a time that you were working on something, maybe you got stuck at a point, so you went off and searched some information. So you tried a solution, but it didn't work. You tried another solution, didn't work. And you tried maybe something slightly different, didn't work. You kept going and going and going and going and going until finally it works. So you go back through your changes to figure out what was it that made it work, and oh dear, you can't figure out what it was that was the change to make it work. So you just leave it as it is, it works for now, maybe someday you'll fix it. This is a pretty good example of something complicated and hard not being effective. So we say that complicated and hard is the least effective that we can be. With complicated and hard being the least effective, what would be the most effective? The most effective would be the opposite of complicated and hard, which would be simple and easy. This talk is entitled Simple, Easy, Effective. That's because it can't always be easy, and we're going to figure out why that is later on. So if you fill in the gaps in between and staying on easy, we can have complicated and easy. What do you think complicated and easy would be? It's not so effective, and why is that? Because it's still complicated. When something is complicated, it's difficult to track what changed to create the result. And eventually, it's going to turn into complicated and hard, and we will figure out later on why that is. So with complicated and easy being not so effective, what's the next gap that we can fill in? It's effective. And what would effective be? Well, it's opposite of complicated and easy, and it's the next step of simple and easy. And that would be simple and hard. So that's where we get simple and hard being effective from. But we're not just going to stop there. We're going to delve deeper in and figure out why this really is. So if we take the first part, simple, why do we say simple? We want simple because we often have to deal with complicated things. You probably work trying to solve complicated problems every day in your job. So we're trying to do the simple things to tackle those complicated problems. This idea of simple has been around for quite a while. There's this thing called the K.I.S.S principle. It's a design principle noted by the US Navy in the 1960s. And it states that most systems work best if they're kept simple rather than made complicated. So a key goal in system design is to avoid unnecessary complexity. And what does K.I.S.S stand for? It stands for keep it simple, stupid. Now, before you think that's being mean, think about it this way. K.I.S.S isn't to use against others. When we do complex things, we think we're being smart, but we're actually being stupid. Have you ever produced a complex piece of work? Were you proud of it? Complexity used to be a way to measure how senior you were. It was seen as a way to ensure your job security, because only you could understand that. But what if you leave? Well, some people have to figure out what that complexity is. But what if you're still there? What's going to happen if it breaks? They're going to come to you to fix it. So that stupid part is for you, is to protect you against yourself. So we've seen why we want simple. What about that second part, hard? Why do we say hard? Hard work sucks, doesn't it? When you work to be better at something, the longer you do it, the harder it gets to be better. And this is just nature. This is the law of diminishing returns. So when you start something new, the progress is pretty quick at the start, but the more you get into it, the harder and harder it gets to make that progress. You can summarize this pretty well by saying, the longer you train, the harder the gains. And this brings us into our next segment. Because this idea of simple and hard being effective comes from some people who figured this out by lifting weights. But before we continue, we're going to take an interesting turn. But before we get there, there's a bit of some information about that. So using analogies can be good to explain or describe something, but without knowing enough about the original context, may create all sorts of understandings. So we're going to try to build some context here, so then we can use some analogies to further explain why simple and hard is effective. The older you are, the harder it is to interact with the world. Maybe for some of the younger people, this isn't so prominent, but maybe for those with some years under the belt, they notice that things are just starting to get harder. Things like carrying their groceries, playing with their children, or walking up the stairs. Some people figure out that the stronger you are, the easier it is to interact with the world. But when we say stronger, we're not talking about this image of balls to the walls effort. We're just talking about simple people who are just getting a tiny bit stronger and improving their quality of life. So maybe your doctor's saying, hey, maybe you should try the gym, build some more muscle to prevent your deterioration later on. So you go to the gym, you don't really know what you're doing, you might hire a personal trainer. They've got you doing this, this, and this, and this. Maybe some complexities involved. And pretty similar to how we talked about being senior was how complex you could understand stuff. So too might they add some complexity to make it seem like they really know what they're doing. Or maybe you go online and search for some information and people are saying do that, 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 and that. But so too is this pretty similar to our little story of doing lots of things and it being complicated. And we know that we don't want to do complicated because it's going to get hard. We've already proven that complicated and hard is not effective. So some people figured out with using the law of diminishing returns that actually at the start, you're going to make progress no matter what you do. So why not, while we're doing those things at the start, we do simple things and get really good at them. So they decided we need some simple tools to use, so they came up with some really simple criteria to build those tools. So they came up with the tools, they're like, well, we need some techniques to use those tools with. So they came up with the techniques, and they decided, well, we need something to drive those tools and techniques with. So it's all relatively kept simple. And no matter who comes to them, they still do those simple things. So the person pictured here is 72 years old, yet here he is in his first session with a barbell on his back. And it really does work. This isn't the same person from before, but this is a gentleman who is older, yet here he is with a greatly significant quality of life improvement and repping some heavy weight. So hopefully you stayed on track there. Hopefully we didn't create more misunderstandings, because the whole point of that was to create a better understanding of why we say simple and hard. These people figure out that it's going to get hard anyway, so you can't change that part. Rather than keep doing these complicated things, we can change the first part of the equation. So would you rather do complicated, or would you rather be simple? And we prove that simple and hard is effective. Maybe you're tuning in right now and you're thinking, well, why are we talking about lifting weights? Is this the right track? Or what's going on? What does this have to do with software, you think? Turns out it's everything to do with software. If we build some analogies of what we just talked about against software, we can think of the body as the software we build, where you don't want a frail body, you want a strong body, and so too should we have stronger software. Those people who go to the coaches, they were paying them and relying on them to build a stronger body, and so too does the business hire us as developers to improve the quality of life of the business with better software. And probably the most significant analogy that we can think of is that those coaches realized most people coming to them are just normal or older people. They don't always get to work with the athletes who can really progress quite well. So they have to be really careful with what they do and make sure that any changes that happen, they can track and be effective. And so too, with the software that we work with, most of the software is probably legacy systems. You don't always get to start on that new project. And even if you do, those who have worked on new projects before know very quickly it turns into the legacy system. So of course, we can take these lessons learnt through building stronger bodies and making better quality of life, and we can apply them to the software that we build. So maybe we won't be invited back if we don't actually talk about some software stuff. So here is some simple things you can do in software development that are hard to get good at but make effective results. And we're going to have 3 things. Oops. And these 3 things, we're just going to say how they're simple, what might be a way they get hard, and how are they effective. So the first one you've probably seen there was test-driven development. How is test-driven development simple? You write a test before your implementation. Before you write any production code, you write your test first. And you might be thinking, well, okay, and you make sure it passes. So even if it's an empty test, you make sure it passes so your framework is working fine. And then you write a failing test. Write enough code to satisfy the requirement you're trying to work on, or part of the requirement you're trying to work on. And then once you have a failing test, then you update your production code with just enough code to pass. And once you get a passing test, you iterate, maybe with a new requirement as a new test, or you just update the test you're working on. And you keep going until all your requirements are complete. So how would this get hard? Well, you're probably not going to do it right at the start. You're probably going to want to write more code than you actually have to. And maybe you're not used to actually writing tests at all. Or maybe you're working with bad code, code that hasn't been tested, code that has been decoupled in a way that it can't be tested easily. Or maybe you're going to encounter skeptics who say, we don't need to do test-driven development, we know our code works. But it is incredibly effective. It reduces the complexity and over-engineering. It means that you can only focus on one thing at a time. It gives you confidence. You build a test suite over time that you can be sure works, and therefore it brings value to the business. You're not shipping out code that you have an uncertainty if it even works. You know that it works. So that was number 1, test-driven development. Number 2 is pair programming. So pair programming is just about regularly pairing up with various teammates and just rotating each time. So how would this be hard? You're going to encounter lots of personalities. You're going to encounter people who don't want to work as a team, maybe just like working by themselves. And you might be pressured to deliver on time. Maybe your manager's going to freak out that you're 2 people are working on one task. But really, in the long run, it saves time. No longer are you in this cycle of putting up a pull request and waiting for people to comment it and get feedback. And you're getting quick, immediate feedback. If somebody doesn't like something you've done, or they can suggest a change, they can suggest it immediately. And improves teamwork. You're really getting to know your teammates, you're getting to know how each other works, and you can suggest in real time how to improve. So that was number 2, pair programming. Number 3 is leave the code cleaner. This is pretty simple because just improving code in areas you're working on. This means just cleaning up things as you go along. But it's hard because you're going to want to do more than you should. So actually the opposite. You're going to want to do more than you should. So there might be, as you go on in time, you might notice more things that you can clean up. Or maybe there's no test to back up your changes. You don't know that cleanup you've done is going to work. Well, how is it effective? The code doesn't rot. As you clean code over time, it prevents further rotting. And we know from that analogy of the bodies getting frail over time and us trying to prevent that, so too we should apply that to our software. We don't want it to get more frail over time. So that was 3 simple things, and these are things that you could actually go off and do straight away. So we didn't really cover too much there. That was pretty brief. So if you are interested in learning more about this kind of stuff, there is the Belfast Software Craftsmanship community. I want to preface and say this talk is not an advertisement for this community. The proposal for this talk was actually submitted before this community even existed. But it's a pretty good community if you're interested in these kind of things that we talked about. And there is a couple of events coming up, and everybody is welcome. Craftsmanship, it doesn't matter who you are, what your age is, your experience, your gender, whatever. And craftsmanship is all about building better professional attitudes, because your attitude matters. It's your attitude that drives you to want to change. But you can't change if you don't first change the way you think. We said at the start this is going to be a pretty important slide, and this is actually the overarching theme of this talk. Has the way you think about simple, hard, and effective changed? This could have been a talk just about simple things to build better software, but actually that was quite insignificant compared to what we talked about. The whole idea was to build up that without doing these simple things, as it gets hard, we can't really be effective. Maybe you're thinking, I don't know, first we were talking about memes, then we were talking about old people lifting weight. I'm kind of lost. Well, no matter what you got from this, everybody can take away that simple and hard makes the complicated easier. That is the end of the talk. Thank you very much.
Well, that was a fantastic talk from Jordan there. I hope everyone's been enjoying the day so far. There's been a lot of talks out there.